Welcome back to Unleashed with Mark Morano. All right, joining us now is environmental scientist Paul Taylor, author of Climate Fetish, a new book which you should be getting. Welcome back to the program, Paul.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be with you.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit. First of all, what is your scientific background, engineering babackground, and then tell us how you came to write this book.
Yeah, that's thank you very much. It's somewhat autobiographical, I guess, too. So I was in graduate school. I worked my way through graduate school at Tulane University in New Orleans in the last century. I'll just be kind.
The last century.
And I studied pollution control. It was environmental science. It was half pollution control, and the other half was toxics and environmental health, that sort of thing. But it covered water pollution, air pollution, solid waste, the entire suite. But at that time, the national laws, the U.S. laws on the environment, in environmental law class, there are only about four major: Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, National Environmental Policy Act, hazardous waste management, that sort of thing. But I was intrigued about all of this because the laws and subsequent cascade of regulations led me to the term ecopolitics, because all of those pertinent solutions to the problems of pollution were laws. It's politics, clear and simple. And so I, made a career of following environmental regulations, got paid to do it. And I have come to the point that I wanted to say a few things about it. And I have a proposal that may or may not be so obvious to anybody. So after 45 years of being involved in environmental politics and by virtue thereof, law, I come to the conclusion that the worst thing that happened to start all this and elevate CO2 as well as other environmental, greenhouse gases, let's put them that way, was the Clean Air Act revisions of 2007, where they named greenhouse gases. And through the Massachusetts versus EPA Supreme Court decision, the finding of endangerment, CO2 that you and I just exhaled became a pollutant. Blows my mind. So my doubt was exposed then, and I've been skeptical about it ever since. I mean, my God, oxygen and CO2 are the two metabolites of all of the life on Earth. Those two. And they chose CO2, I suppose, because they could connect oil or petroleum to it, or that it's a waste gas, that sort of thing. But my God, oxygen, its analog, is explosive. It promotes combustion. So why not make oxygen as well? Endangerment blows my mind. So I've been
go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I've been skeptical since then, and here we are.
All right, well, I'm going to interject breaking news. I don't know if you've seen this yet. I just posted it. I was actually going to save this story for tomorrow for my show Unleashed on TNT, but here it is. Peer-reviewed study published in PLOS1, human breathing contributes to global warming. This just came out this past week.
There you are.
And just so you understand what they're saying for the listeners, it's a study titled Measurements of Methane and Nitrous Oxide in Human Breath and Development. And they literally talk about how it's contributing to global warming. So, you talked about Massachusetts versus EPA 2007 for the first time regulating human exhaling as CO2 as a pollutant. This is now codifying it. What's your comment on this new study? And are we the carbon they want to eliminate?
Well,
humans?
should I hold my breath? Um, no, this is the greatest. I figured so. It's been a joke to me for many many years. Well, that you just exhaled a pollutant, and
Yeah.
now look where we are. Uh, it's insane. It is totally insane. It,
It's interesting that they expanded it from CO2, which we exhale, but also I guess the level of methane in our breath and nitrous oxide in human breath. Now,
well,
Scientific American recently had a publication saying that our consumption of too much meat turns from the nitrogen fertilizer turns to nitrous oxide, which makes our pee, human pee, is a greenhouse gas causing problems. So they're coming after us from our breath, from our
right,
body excrements.
right.
Your comment.
This is anti-human. This is very much anti-human. First, they wanted to inconvenience us. Then they want us to pay for all this stuff. And now they are saying that we, as individually living, breathing human beings, are the culprits, or that we're some contribution to that. Is I can only use the word insane.
Yeah, it makes you think of the Fauci mask mandates a little differently too. Remember, they were going after our breathing then as well during a virus scare. Now they're going after our breathing again during a climate scare. Makes you think they don't want us alive, or they want us to be very restricted in our movement and breathing.
Right. I really don't have words to comment. I heard this as you did in the news lately, and
yes.
I don't get it. So,
okay. All right.
So how do we fix? What are we supposed to do? Change our respiration or something, or wear a
I think
home sequestration.
Well, the ultimate solution, I think, is they want less of us. The UN has stated, German climate advisor Hans Schulenhuber, who I interviewed, wants about 1 billion people. That's the carrying capacity of the Earth. They get very uncomfortable with more than 1 billion.
Yeah.
And we have, of course, 8 billion now, or 7.5, whatever it is.
Yeah. So, are we going to have individual sequestration of carbon? Like in our home, we're going to have a sequestration unit in our garage. By the way, this sequestration thing, I did some research on this over the weekend, and Iceland has one of the largest and so-called most successful free air extraction of CO2. And what they do is, and by the way, their notes tell me that CO2 is released at the rate of 44 billion tons a year, including our exhalation, and that they need to remove between 2 and 11 billion tons a year to somehow accommodate a change in the direction of the climate. Where does this stuff come from? And they're getting a tremendous amount of money for this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that Al Gore in 2008, after the CO2 becomes a pollution, threw a party for all of these venture capitalists to come up with all of these schemes for carbon trading. You realize that these carbon captures are going to be selling the carbon that they take out of the air at some rate and put in the ground for a ton, something like $100 per ton. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Wow. All right. Well, so you got involved in this. You wrote your book. Tell us a little bit about your book and what message you're conveying, and what you want readers to come away with from your book, The Climate of Politics, I guess Climate Fetish. And why the title Fetish? It sounds kinky or something. What's the story behind that?
Well, it's to get you thinking. But no, it really means something like a religion or some sort of rite that is abnormally adhered to, or something that's just irrational.
You're compelled to do whether you want to or not. Yeah.
Right. It's a cultish. It's a cultish thing. Environmentalism. And as we spoke previously, the Sierra Club back in I guess 2005 or so said environmentalism thank God, is the densest organized movement, political movement that's in the world, in human history. So there's plenty of people out there to carry the banner, to glue themselves around and destroy historic art figures.
Speaking about, I don't know if you've heard before you came on, I played the clip of the environmental activist who wants to ban plastic being interviewed. And they literally didn't know that everything they were sitting there at the congressional hearing was all made out of plastic. Sure. What do you make of this war on plastic? And how is this, as I was mentioning, we got the paper straws that dissolve without anyone voting for it. We now have plastic bags disappearing from all our stores, and we have these paper bags that fall apart, or you can have your bacteria-ridden reusable bags if you want. Right. Why the war on plastic? And is plastic that bad? And how are they getting this done? Once again, it seems like they're bypassing democracy again and just imposing this agenda upon us.
Yeah, this is a prescriptive regulations, not the market-based regulations. That's in part of my book. Is they force this stuff down your throat without any recognition of the cost, and not just the inconvenience of the bags. And by the way, they're also connecting plastic, microscopic plastic or plastic waste in the oceans now. They're polluting the oceans, and they're beginning to say that these plastics are in our water supplies now. And I don't know what the pathway to any human harm would be from that stuff. I just don't, unless you're swallowing the bag whole. Right. It's the climate has become the simple, and I mean by that simple ton, excuse for all of this stuff.
It really has. Okay, well, we're talking with environmental scientist Paul Taylor. We're talking about his book, Climate Fetish. And this is Unleashed with Mark Morano. We'll be right back after these messages, talk a little bit more about the COP and some of the more recent climate studies out. I'm going to get his opinion on. This is the TNT Radio. Stay tuned.
This is Unleashed with Mark Morano on today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
Welcome back to Unleashed with Mark Morano on TNT Radio. We're talking with environmental scientist Paul Taylor, who's the author of the new book, Climate Fetish. Paul, this recent UN summit that just concluded, they had multiple fashion events. We were just talking about plastic.
Yeah.
I interviewed a keynote speaker at one of the events, and I asked him about this report with corporate sponsorship. Google, IKEA, and Mayor Bloomberg in New York, when he was mayor, signed off on this, funded this report. They called for a limit of 3 new items of clothing per person per year by 2030 in order to meet our net zero climate goals. And I asked this person, they said, well, I said, do you support that? They said, well, that depends on what kind of clothing. If you're getting organic hemp, you're probably okay to buy more than 3. If you're getting cockroach clothing, you're probably more okay. But not if you're getting plastic, synthetic fabrics of any kind, or probably even animal. She didn't specifically say, but animal fabric, because you figure, you need agriculture, and that's going to create methane and environmental destruction. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, this is net zero now, literally the UN defending, and billionaires and corporations putting the idea out that we have to be limited to 3 new items of clothing per person per year by 2030.
It just gets crazier. What about the expanded wastewater from washing having only 3 sets of clothes per year? You have to wash the wastewater. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that's about as absurd as the exhalation control.
Well, actually, I interviewed a climate activist, Kevin Anderson, at the UN climate meeting. It was probably COP20 or so in Poland, I believe it was. And he actually stopped showering in order to lower his carbon footprint and save the earth. So I think they would just tell you you're going to smell more. I don't think they would tell you you're going to have to wash clothing more. But anyway, okay. Well, on the same vein, let me ask you about this. The EPA is being sued by 18 kids, with some as young as 8 years old, in California court for not ensuring their climate future. The Biden EPA is being accused of failing to fix the climate and endangering these children's future. And the lead plaintiff in the case is a 17-year-old girl named Genesis, who says she can't do her homework during the day because our CO2-induced atmosphere has created such warmth in California that she can't focus. So she has to do it in the evening when it's cooler because her parents can't afford air conditioning. Is that a slam dunk lawsuit? I mean, what is your comment on that? Do you think that's a viable lawsuit? And is there any science to back up these 18 kids, some as young as 8 years old, suing a government unelected bureaucracy for failing to fix the climate? What do you make of that? And what does that say about our society at large?
Yeah, well, that's about the most tortured cause of action I've ever heard of. And good luck with that filing. Again, this is just this crazy stuff, and you can't make this stuff up. You really can't. I mean, this is another victim class, right? It's another victim class because of global warming.
I mean, Greta Thunberg told kids, why go to school if you have no future? There's no future. There's no reason to go to school because we're doomed because of climate change.
Yeah, don't have kids when you grow up.
That's AOC saying. Others are saying that.
Existential threat. Yeah.
Yes.
These things are just. I think there's a lot of gratuity. It's just federal government when they do good stuff. On the edges of those things, some of these things are just so gratuitous. They can't be enforced. They always cost more. There's always an inconvenience involved in it for the average person. Getting back to this, when I was in my consulting practice, and now that I'm semi-retired, I have been a court expert, and I'm actually I have an agent here in Pasadena that's a forensics group, and I get these really not this odd, but I get some very interesting court engagements. For example, Federal Trade Commission. Federal Trade Commission has a green guides that prohibits eco-claims for advertisements that are false or misleading.
Interesting.
Do you ever imagine that? They have a whole section, they have a code section, that if you use the terms renewable, biodegradable, eco-friendly, compostable, sustainable, they're actionable, if you use them falsely, are actionable violations. This happened to involve, because of confidentiality, I can't say who it was, but it was basically a health product for babies in their cribs. Anyway, it's things you never imagine.
Yeah. Well, so let me ask you, what would you tell what would you tell parents? What would you tell kids who are worried? What would you specifically tell kids who are worried about doomsday? And what would you tell parents how to prevent their kids from being indoctrinated from kindergarten through college? How do they fight back intellectually and and just culturally against this phenomena that's hitting them from academia and Hollywood and all the media, just that they're doomed and that the climate is going to be destroyed, they have no future, and we have to go full Marxist in order to save their future? How do you talk to kids, and how do you talk to parents?
Yeah, well, that's interesting because some of the college classes now are having as a special project for these kids to computate your carbon footprint. It's basically having them present their carbon footprint in front of the class is sort of a climate shaming exercise. This is crazy. Put them in a private school. Unfortunately, that's expensive. I think this, and not only the recent exposure of our great universities, that those people my apologies for my generation, we started all the protest stuff back in the 60s and 70s. Yeah. And all of that is, those people are running the universities now. And they've gotten totally lost from the reality and the morality of basically life on Earth if they're threatened by people screaming about climate change. You can only tell them, well, as I said the other day, substitute the word weather for climate. That might help. But eco-politics comes down to politics and the policies of the education associations.
What do you make when you hear about like the science institutions, like the governing boards of the National Academy of Science, the American Meteorological, the American Geophysical Union? You know, they almost to a board, they all vote. You know that the idea is CO2 is a problem and it's a concern and we need to deal with it. And they're, you know, and then people use that as evidence that all scientists agree. You know, when we did it, and we did this in our film and in my books. Yeah, it turns out that the actual rank and file are never consulted. It's the governing board of 24 or so who are steeped in the politics and the funding. But how do you respond to that when people tell you all scientists agree? Are you a climate denier? And invoking the Holocaust denier when they mention that.
Yeah, are you familiar with Judith Curry's work?
Yes, we've had her on this program before. Yes.
Yeah, she's incredible. Well, you know, her take on the consensus. She says this is a manufactured scientific census that corrupts science. And I totally agree with her. Again, I think that's our job, right? To do something about this, to influence the politics, to come back to reality, to stop all of this climate shaming. You know, it's the ecologista, the 15,000 basically climate nonprofits. That's a big that's a big army of people to carry out this lie.
Yeah, it is, and you know, you see them in full force at like COP28, which I attended. Let me ask you a little bit about.
By the way,
sure.
can I just add, I just want to add that the top 5 of these green nonprofits, those guys are not haven't taken vows of poverty. Those guys are knocking down $250,000, $300,000 a year doing this stuff at the top executive.
They always say that climate skeptics were funded by by corporations and by big oil. Turns out one donation from the Natural Gas Institute to the Sierra Club to fight coal was more than ever, like the top 3 skeptical organizations were ever accused of giving combined. I mean, there's just no money. And then, of course, ExxonMobil gave $100 million to Stanford University.
Right.
The money now, all the greenwashing and all these big corporations. Right. Exxon supported the UN Paris Agreement, and I mean, you can go on and on. It's incredible, but yet they try to flip that. Why do you think the big oil companies are so virtue signaling on this? You'll see even OPEC the OPEC member nations fought the UN on phasing out fossil fuels and instead allowed the word transition away. Why do they even play the game? You think it's just because of economic sanctions? They want to be the part of the community of nations. It's the peer pressure. Why give in on this nonsense?
Well, it is a tax deduction, right?
Yes.
And they get green cred. You've got to be green these days. You got to walk the line, the green line, and or you'd be called a climate denier. I'd say these other people are debate deniers, and I'll take the badge of skeptic anytime. I was born as a scientist, and that's my position in the world.
What do you think when they fail through democracy? Obviously, they switch it. Not only do you have the mandates that are executive orders, but you have something called ESG, Environment, Social Governance, which I believe she wrote about. They're now telling banks with government, corporate collusion, with academia, with environmental groups, they're denying funding now to fossil fuel projects. What kind of impact does that have, and what do you think we can do to stop that? I mean, they've corrupted our banking system to do their bidding so that they can buy, again, another way to bypass the legislator, so we don't have a say. It's just sort of being imposed upon us.
Those ESG scores, those scores are, there are job offerings to train, to certify the environmental, which is the E in that ESG, to get certification of these things. But what is happening is there's a bunch of ETFs and other investments that collect ESG compliance to, industry. Those are failing. They're failing. They were really hot about 2 years ago now, but those are failing now because people are not accepting. First of all, many of the renewables are failing. I mean, they're shutting down all these East Coast wind farms. This putting carbon in the ground, that cannot be cost effective. It can't be.
Yeah, you carbon capture, then you put in some pipelines, and then you start moving it around.
2,000 feet down, one of them, they take the gas and they freeze the gas. You know how expensive it is to get that down to like minus 300 degrees and get it so you can pump it into the ground? And by the way, if you're taking carbon dioxide out of the air, you're taking one carbon out, you're taking two oxygens out. At what point does that affect our absolute immediate demand for oxygen every time we take a breath? It's kind of
Interesting
ridiculous.
question. Well, remember, human breathing, that's good. Less breathing is good for the planet. So.
Maybe that's the only way that works, I guess.
All right, well, we're running out of time. We have about 2 minutes left. But how do we fight this entire agenda? We've seen how they've corrupted the kids. They've corrupted the media. They've corrupted scientific organizations. You have the UN net zero agenda, the transition away from fossil fuels. You have most major politicians afraid to take this on. The few who have, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Donald Trump in the U.S., are facing jail time for whatever reason. The entire deep state comes after anyone who challenges this. Yeah. And Elon Musk is probably the next one in the target. He came out and said climate fears are overblown and we shouldn't demonize oil and gas. Yeah. And he's seeing his net worth being destroyed now because so much of his money and value is tied to government and liberals and the whole ideology of climate. So he's shooting himself in the foot. How do we fight back on this in the final minute?
Well, you and I keep it up, for one thing. Seriously, your work has an enormous impact.